I have kept this secret for 7 years. That is not a small thing, for a man of my particular nature. I am not by temperament a keeper of secrets. I am the sort of man who laughs too loudly at dinners, who says the wrong thing at precisely the wrong moment, who has been known, on more than one occasion, to ruin a perfectly good surprise simply because the silence of it became too much to bear. My wife has remarked on this failing with the patience of a saint and the frequency of a schoolmaster. My friends have long since stopped trusting me with anything they would not wish printed in the Morning Gazette. And yet I kept this one. I kept it because he asked me to. And because I loved him, as one loves a man who has been a brother to you since the age of 9, who stood at your side when your own father died, who once rode through a January night in sleet and half-frozen mud simply because your letter said you were low and could not say why. When a man like that asks you for silence, you give it to him. You give it without question, and you carry it, and you do not let it go even when the weight of it makes your chest ache a little on quiet evenings. His name, the name I shall give him here, as I have always given the men of his line in my private thoughts, was the Duke of Thornville, the most feared duke in the northern counties. That was what they called him in the drawing rooms of London, in the gossip columns that the ladies passed around behind their fans, in the hushed and reverent tones of men who had sat across a negotiating table from him and lost. He was not feared because he was cruel. I want to be clear on that, because the world has a habit of confusing the two. He was feared because he was precise, because he did not bluster and he did not threaten, and he did not make promises he did not intend to keep. He spoke rarely, and when he did, every word landed exactly where he placed it. He had a way of looking at a man that made the man suddenly and acutely aware of every dishonest thing he had ever done. I had known him since we were boys. I had watched him grow from a quiet, serious child into a quiet, formidable man, and I had loved him all the way through, and I had never once, not in 40 years of friendship, seen him lose his composure over a woman. Until her name was Marin. She was the daughter of a man named Aldous Voss, a small gentleman farmer from the village of Crestwick, 6 miles from Thornville's eastern boundary, who had borrowed money during the hard winter of 1817 and spent the following years borrowing more to cover the interest on what he'd borrowed before. It was the sort of quiet, grinding financial ruin that did not announce itself with drama, but simply deepened, year by year, the way water deepens a riverbed, invisibly, steadily, until the ground beneath gives way. Marin's mother had died when Marin was 14. Her 2 older brothers had taken what work they could find and gone north. Her father, a gentle man with no gift for the world's harder mathematics, had done his best and failed at it with great dignity and increasing desperation. By the time Marin was 19, the debts had become the kind that courts notice. She came to Thornville Hall in the spring of 1818 to ask for work. I was not there the morning she arrived, but Reeves, the Duke's man of affairs, who had served Thornville for 30 years and whose discretion was absolute, told me about it afterward, in the careful, measured way that Reeves told everything, with the precise minimum of words and the precise maximum of information. She came to the servants' entrance, Reeves said. She did not go to the front. She wore a dress that had been mended twice at the hem and once at the left sleeve, but she wore it as though it were silk. She did not look down when she spoke, and she did not apologize for coming, and when she explained her situation, her father's debts, her need for work, her willingness to do whatever was required, she did so without weeping and without self-pity, and without the kind of desperate brightness some young women put on like a costume when they are afraid. She simply told the truth, and then she waited. The housekeeper, Mrs. Aldgate, a practical woman with a brisk manner and a surprisingly warm interior, hired her as a parlor maid on the spot. She would say later, when I asked her about it, that there had been something about the girl, a quality she could not quite name, a way of standing in a room that made you certain she would not steal from you, would not gossip, would not make scenes, a kind of quiet that was not timidity but something else entirely. I would come to understand much later what that quality was. It was dignity, real dignity, the kind that is not given to you by a title or a fortune, but grows inside a person like a spine, from the inside out, through years of choosing not to collapse when collapsing would have been entirely reasonable. She was, in short, the kind of woman who earns respect without asking for it, which is the rarest kind of all. I came to Thornville Hall that June for my usual summer visit, a month of shooting, of riding the estate's excellent horses, of long dinners and longer evenings, and the particular deep restfulness that only that house has ever given me. It is a serious house. Dark wood, high ceilings, windows that frame the moors like paintings. It has never been fashionable in the way that some great houses are fashionable, but it has a gravity to it, a sense of weight and permanence that I have always found profoundly settling. He met me in the drive as he always did. We shook hands and did not embrace, because that is not the manner of men of our time and temperament, but there was warmth in the handshake, the warmth of a lifetime. At dinner that first evening, I noticed something. A small thing, easily missed. We were halfway through the second course, a very good rabbit fricassee, as I recall, and the parlor maid came in to refill the wine, and he stopped speaking mid-sentence. Not a long pause, half a second perhaps. He recovered immediately, picked up his sentence precisely where he had left it, finished his point with characteristic precision. If I had not been watching him as I was, because I always watched him, because after 40 years you develop a certain attentiveness to the particular rhythms of a person, I would not have noticed it at all. But I watched him and I noticed. I noticed, too, that he did not look at her when she poured the wine. He looked, very deliberately, at the painting above the sideboard, a competent but unremarkable landscape of the North Moors, which had hung there for 20 years, and which he had never, in all my memory, looked at with any particular interest. I said nothing. Over the following days, I watched him the way you watch something you are not certain you are seeing correctly, with the slightly squinting attentiveness of a man who suspects he may be imagining things, but does not yet wish to be proven wrong. He was, in all respects, exactly as he had always been, composed, precise, attentive, formidable. He rode well and shot well and managed his estate with the quiet competence that was his most characteristic quality. He was kind to his tenants in the particular way of men who do not make a show of kindness, but simply practice it steadily, without comment. But twice more that week I caught it, the half-second pause, the very deliberate looking elsewhere. She, for her part, showed no sign of anything. She performed her duties with the same quiet efficiency that Mrs. Aldgate had apparently admired from the first day, and she did not look at him either, not from shyness, or at least not from shyness alone, but with the careful, practiced invisibility of a well-trained servant who understands that her function in a room is to be useful without being noticed. On the fifth evening after dinner, when we had settled into the library with our brandy and the particular comfortable silence that long friendship makes possible, I said, "Tell me about the parlor maid." He was quiet for a long moment, long enough that I thought he might not answer at all, which was a thing he was entirely capable of, a silence so complete and so unapologetic that it answered the question by refusing to. Then he said, "Her name is Marin Voss. Her father is Aldous Voss of Crestwick. His debts will bring him to court before winter if something is not done." I looked at him. "And will something be done?" I said. "It is being considered," he said. I held my brandy and I looked at the fire, and I was very careful not to say any of the things that came to mind, because I knew him, and I knew that the way into this, whatever this was not through the front door but through the side, and slowly. "How long?" I asked. He turned his glass in his fingers, one revolution, then, since March. March, 2 months before she had come to Thornville Hall, since before she arrived. He had known of her before he saw her, known of her father, of the debts, of the situation, and had been considering it since March. Or had he seen her somewhere before? At the village market, perhaps, or on the road from Crestwick. Had he watched her then, the way he watched things, carefully, without appearing to watch? And had he already been carrying this thing, this whatever it was, before she ever knocked on the servant's entrance of his house? I did not ask. I stored it away in the careful, private place where I stored things about him, and I said only, "And what is the shape of the consideration?" "Anonymous," he said, "through Reeves." "Of course," I said. "She is not to know," he said. And then, because he knew what I was going to say next, he said it before I could. "And neither are you officially." "And unofficially?" The corner of his mouth moved. It was not quite a smile, but for him it was the approximate equivalent. "Unofficially," he said, "I find that I require a witness." That was the night he told me, and that was the beginning of 7 years of silence. I want to be precise about what the payments were, because I think precision matters here. They were not large in the way that the Duke of Thornville reckoned large. He was a man of significant means, and the sums involved were, to him, what an afternoon's wages would be to a working man. But they were, to Aldous Voss, the difference between ruin and survival. They covered the immediate debts first, the ones with teeth, the ones that had begun to attract the attention of men who carried documents and knocked on doors in the early morning. Then, quietly, over the following months, the deeper ones. Reeves managed it through a London solicitor whom he trusted absolutely, under a fiction of a small legacy from a distant Voss relation. A cousin, supposedly, who had gone to the West Indies in 1801 and done tolerably well for himself, and had recently remembered his English family in his will. Aldous Voss, who was, as I said, a gentle man, accepted the fiction with gratitude and a little bewilderment and a great deal of relief. He did not investigate it too closely. People rarely do, when the thing they most needed arrives in a form they can accept with their dignity intact. And Marin knew that her father's situation had improved. She knew because he wrote to her brief, careful letters in the neat hand of a man who had once had better penmanship and now had worse eyesight, and the letters had changed tone somewhere in the autumn of 1818. Less carefully worded, less tightly controlled, a lightness in them that had not been there before. He mentioned the cousin from the West Indies. He seemed to believe it entirely. And she, working in the candle-lit rooms of Thornville Hall, was glad for him and did not think to question it, because why would she? The story was plausible. The relief was real. The letters were lighter. That was enough. She did not know who her father's benefactor was. She did not know that the man who passed her in the corridor each morning, who looked, as I said, very precisely at something other than her, was the reason her father had not lost his house. I watched it, across those 7 years, with the helpless tenderness of a man who has been made the keeper of something too large and too private for words. I came to Thornville Hall each summer and each Christmas, and sometimes in between when I could manage it, and I watched him live alongside this thing he carried. There is a particular quality to watching a man in love with someone he will not allow himself to reach. It is not a dramatic thing. It does not announce itself in grand gestures or visible torment. In his case, it was visible only to me, and only because I knew where to look. It was in the extra moment he gave to an estate matter he had already resolved, when I could see from where I stood that she was crossing the far end of the corridor. It was in the letters he wrote to Reeves, which I saw occasionally, when Reeves thought I should, which was rarely, that were precise about the payments and the accounting, but that contained, once in the winter of 1820, a single line that had nothing to do with the finances. "Ask Aldgate how she does." He crossed it out. He rewrote it as a question about the household accounts, but I saw the crossed-out line and I understood it. I remember one particular Christmas, the Christmas of 1821, when the snow came early and the moors went white in the first week of December, and stayed that way through the new year. I had come up from London on the 22nd and found Thornville Hall with its usual winter gravity, the dark stone holding the snow at a slight distance, the candles in the windows doing their steady amber work against the early dark. On Christmas evening after dinner, the household staff were given the tradition of the hall, a brief gathering in the servants' hall below, with a little music and the Duke's customary gift of a coin and a small package for each. It was not an unusual custom for a great house. He attended it himself, as his father had attended it and his grandfather before that, for exactly 15 minutes, with the particular contained warmth of a man who does not perform generosity but practices it. I happened to be passing the servants' hall doorway when he came out. Had he known I was there, he might have chosen another route, but he came around the corner and found me before he could redirect. He stopped. I looked at him. He said nothing for a moment. He had the same composed, precise face he always had, and then, very quietly, he said, "She plays the piano." "Does she?" I said. "There is an instrument below. Old, it has not been tuned in years, but she plays." He was quiet for a moment. "She plays very well." I said nothing. I simply looked at him. "She was teaching the younger girls a carol," he said. "The way the patience he stopped. He looked at the wall. He said, 'It is a significant quality, patience combined with genuine expectation. Most people who are patient expect nothing. She expects everything and simply waits for it to arrive.'" I thought but did not say, "That may be the most accurate description of her that I have ever heard, and you arrived at it from watching her teach a carol on an untuned piano." "Yes," I said instead, and I let him pass, and I watched him go down the corridor with his usual measured step, and I stood in the cold passage and felt the weight of the secret like a hand pressed gently on my chest. He was, outwardly, unchanged. He continued to run his estate with precision and fairness. He continued to appear with reluctant regularity at the London Season's Better parties, where the mothers of suitable young women continued to present their daughters to him with hopeful smiles, and where he continued to be politely and entirely impervious to all of them. He was not rude. He was not cold, exactly. He was simply not interested. I should say something more about what she was like in those 7 years, because a woman is not only the way a man looks at her. She is herself, entirely, in all the space around him and beside him, and she was in that house for 7 years before anyone told her the truth, and she lived those years as her own person, not as a figure waiting to be revealed. She read, as I mentioned, the history books, chosen deliberately. Mrs. Aldgate told me once, with the particular satisfaction of a woman who has made a good appointment, that Marin had reorganized the servants' reference library, a modest collection of household manuals and agricultural almanacs and the occasional improving text, into something actually useful. With a small hand-copied index, she had made herself one winter when the weather kept the household confined. It was not asked of her. It was simply the kind of thing she saw needed doing and did. She was, by all accounts, neither popular nor unpopular among the other servants. She was respected, which is a different and more durable thing. She did not gossip, which some of the younger maids found slightly disconcerting and others found deeply restful. She was willing to take on additional work when someone was ill, and she did so without making it felt as a favor. When the footman Thomas broke his wrist in the autumn of 1822 and could not manage his regular duties for 6 weeks, Marin quietly absorbed a good portion of them alongside her own without remarking on it to anyone. And Thomas, when he recovered, was so grateful that he brought her a small paper of tea from the village market and set it on her work table without a word, because he did not know how to say the thing properly, and this seemed the nearest equivalent. She wrote to her father every week. The letters, I understand, from Aldous Voss himself, who told me about them years later with a simplicity that was more affecting than anything elaborate could have been. The letters were always cheerful and specific, not falsely cheerful, not the performance of cheer that some people put on when they are trying to protect a parent from the difficulty of their situation. But genuinely attentive, she wrote about the things around her, the small events of the house and the estate, the state of the north garden in autumn, the quality of the winter light, a book she had found interesting, a question she had thought about. She wrote, said her father, as though she found the world worth describing. He saved every letter. I know because I saw them, later, a bundle of them, tied with brown twine, in the top drawer of his writing table in Crestwick. He showed them to me with the careful pride of a man who has produced something he did not quite produce, who gave the material but is astonished by what the other person made of it. In the house, she moved as she always had, with the quiet, unperformative efficiency that Mrs. Aldgate had recognized on the first day. She did not draw attention to herself, but not because she was afraid to be noticed. She did not draw attention to herself because she was genuinely absorbed in what was in front of her, and did not need the room's attention to feel real in it. That is, I think, a rarer quality than it appears. Most people, even the dignified ones, need some portion of the room to be watching them. She did not seem to need this at all. And through all of it she did not know. She did not know that the improvement in her father's situation was sitting 12 rooms away from her each morning, going through his estate accounts with the same precise attention he gave everything. She did not know that the fiction of the West Indies cousin had been constructed by the same mind that could reconstruct, from a single morning's observation, in the rain, outside a solicitor's office, the essential quality of a person's character. She did not know that the man who passed her in the corridor each morning and looked very deliberately at the wall beyond her, saw her, had always seen her. 7 years is a long time to not know a thing that was sitting that close. His cousin Peveril, a man I had disliked for 30 years, on the reasonable grounds that he was exactly the sort of man who improves not at all with acquaintance, occasionally remarked on this at family gatherings with the particular brightness of a man who is looking for soft places in other people's armor. "Still holding out, cousin," he would say, with the smile of a man who thought himself subtle. For what, one wonders, the perfect woman, or the wrong one? Thornville would look at him with that look, the one that made men suddenly aware of their dishonesty, and say nothing, and Peveril would laugh as though he had made a jest, and retreat to find someone less disconcerting to talk at. I watched Peveril at those gatherings, and I stored things away. He had a way of collecting information, not from malice alone, though malice was certainly present, but from a kind of acquisitive instinct, the way some men collect debts or snuff boxes. He liked to know things. He liked to be the man in the room who knew. I kept in those years a close eye on Reeves. Not from distrust, Reeves was incorruptible, I would have staked my life on it, but because the payments had to pass through somewhere, and somewhere always carries risk. The London solicitor was sound. The fiction of the West Indies cousin was, I thought, thin but sufficient. Aldous Voss was not a suspicious man. Marin was not a suspicious woman. The world, for the most part, does not look for explanations behind good fortune. It accepts them and moves on. 7 years, I thought. 7 years, and nothing has come loose. I was wrong. It was in the winter of 1825, the February of it, the gray and grinding kind, when the Thornville moors look like the surface of the moon, and the house hunkers into itself against the wind, that I received a letter from Reeves. It was not his usual manner of writing to me. His usual manner was formal and brief and perfectly controlled, each word chosen as precisely as a surgeon's instrument. This letter was all of those things, but beneath the precision there was something else. A tension in it, like a wire pulled to its limit. He wrote that a matter had arisen requiring my attention, and would I come to Thornville at my earliest convenience, and that he had not yet spoken of this matter to his Grace. I came the following week. Reeves told me, in the library, with the door closed and his back to the window, that Peveril had been asking questions. Not asking them of Reeves, Reeves would have shut that down with a single, well-placed silence, but asking them elsewhere. of the London solicitor's clerk, who was young and not entirely proof against the kind of interested, friendly conversation that Peveril was, when it served him, entirely capable of producing. Of a man in the village of Crestwick, who had once done casual work at Aldous Voss's farm, and who, for the price of 2 evenings' drinking, had been happy to share what he knew about the improvement in the Voss family's fortunes and the peculiar timing of it. Peveril, Reeves said, had now a fairly clear picture. Not proof, not the kind of proof that could be produced in a court or a letter, but enough. Enough to say the thing quietly in the right ears, in the way that a man like Peveril was skilled at saying things, not as an accusation but as a fascinating piece of speculation, shared with an air of reluctant concern. "And has he said anything yet?" I asked. "Not yet," Reeves said, "but I believe he will." "To whom?" Reeves's expression did not change. "To her," he said. I sat with that for a moment. There was a fire in the library grate, the same library where Thornville had told me about the payments 7 years ago, and it crackled in the silence with indifferent cheerfulness. "He wants her to know," I said, "not because he cares about her knowing, because he wants her to know it from him." "Yes," Reeves said. The cruelty of it was very simple. If Peveril told her, if the truth of the payments came to her through his mouth, shaped by his particular skill for making generous things sound like manipulation, it would land differently than if it came from Thornville. It would arrive wrapped in the implication that she had been managed, handled, kept in comfortable ignorance for 7 years, that the payments were a kind of ownership by other means, that her father's relief and her own work in this house had been, from the start, arranged. She would not be able to see through it clearly, because clarity is difficult when the ground has just shifted beneath your feet. And then the story of the Duke of Thornville paying a maid's father's debts in secret would move through the county with Peveril's particular momentum, and it would not be a love story. It would be a scandal of the managing, possessive, inappropriate kind, and Thornville's name would be touched by it, and Marin's name along with it, in the way that women's names suffer in these stories and men's names do not. I went to Thornville's study. He was at his desk, going over the estate accounts, an activity he undertook each February with the same unhurried thoroughness he brought to everything, and he looked up when I came in, and he saw my face, and he said, "Sit down." I sat, and I told him. He listened without interrupting. He always listened without interrupting. It was one of the most reliable things about him, and when I finished he was quiet for a long moment. Then he set down his pen. He set it down very carefully, parallel to the edge of the ledger, and he placed his hands flat on the desk, and he looked at them. "How long has Peveril had this?" he said. "Reeves believes since Christmas. He has been careful about it, building what he has before using it." "And his intention?" "To speak to her before you do." Another silence. The wind pressed against the study windows. Outside, the moors were white and gray and enormous. "Then I have to speak to her first," he said. "Yes," I said, "you do." He looked at me. And for the first time in 40 years of knowing him, I saw something in his face that I could not immediately name, not fear exactly, because he was not a man who admitted fear through his face, but something adjacent to it. Something that lived in the same territory. The look of a man who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and now must put it down in front of another person, and does not know what will happen when he does. "Will you stay?" he said. "I will be in the library," I said, "for as long as you need." He nodded, and I left him. I do not know how he arranged it, whether he asked Mrs. Aldgate, or Reeves, or whether he simply waited in the corridor with the particular patience of a man who knew the rhythms of his own house better than anyone. But within the hour, according to what Marin told me afterward, she told me afterward, and I will come to that, she was called to the small parlor off the east corridor. Not the formal drawing room, not the study, the small parlor, a room I knew well, A quiet room with windows that faced the winter garden and a fire that had been built up against the cold, and two chairs drawn to a reasonable angle from each other, neither facing directly in confrontation nor arranged in the false warmth of social ease. He was already there when she came in. She had been, she told me, carrying a tray of pressed linens from the upstairs rooms, and she had set it down in the corridor at Mrs. Aldgate's quiet request, and had come to the small parlor not knowing what she was coming to, and had found him standing at the window. He turned when she entered. She stood near the door, as was proper, and he said, "Please sit down, Miss Voss." She sat. He remained standing for a moment. She thought, she told me, that he seemed to be deciding something, or perhaps finishing a decision already made. And then he sat as well in the chair across from hers, and he folded his hands and he looked at her. "I owe you a truth," he said. "I should have told it to you long before now. The only honest explanation I have for not doing so is that I am not certain, even now, that you will receive it well, and I have been afraid is too strong a word, but it is the nearest one. I have been cautious about what it would cost you to know." She did not speak. She was very still. "Your father's debts," he said, "the improvement in his situation, the legacy from the West Indies cousin." She went very still, stiller than before, if that was possible. He watched her face and he said, "There was no cousin, there was no legacy, the payments came from me." The fire crackled, the wind pressed the windows, the winter garden outside was white and bare. "From you," she said. "Yes." "Why?" Not a question exactly. The word arrived flat, stripped of inflection, the voice of someone bracing for an answer they have not yet decided how to feel about. He said, and I know this because she told me, word for word, because she had held the words in her memory from the moment he said them. "The way you hold words that change the shape of something," he said. "Because I could not watch your father's situation resolve itself poorly, and have the means to prevent it and not act. That is the simplest version of it." "And the less simple version," she said. He was quiet one beat, too. "I had seen you," he said, "in the village the March before you came here. You were helping your father sort some papers outside the solicitor's office, and it was raining, and you were holding the papers over him so they would not get wet, and you were getting wet instead, and you were doing it in such a matter-of-fact way, not as a great sacrifice, not dramatically, just as the obvious thing to do, and I saw you and I thought." He stopped. He turned his glass. There was no glass, but his hands made the motion anyway, the habitual gesture of a man who is thinking very carefully. "I thought, there is a person of real quality, and then I asked about you, and I learned about your father's situation, and I found that I could not unknow it." She sat with this. Her face, by her own account, was not easy to read in that moment. She was not certain herself what she felt, which is the honest position for a person in an honest story. "7 years," she said. "Yes." "And you said nothing." "I did not know how to say it without it sounding like something it was not meant to be." "What was it not meant to be?" He looked at her. "A claim," he said. "It was never meant to be a claim. It was not. I did not do it so that you would owe me something. I want to be very clear about that. I did it because I had the means and the motive and no honest reason not to. And if you ask me what the motive was—" He stopped again. He seemed in that moment to find precision more difficult than usual. "You are the motive. The simplest statement I can make is that. You were the motive from the first morning in the rain outside the solicitor's office, and you have been the motive for 7 years. And I am telling you now not because I expect you to feel anything particular about it, but because a man named Peveril has learned enough of the truth to tell you a distorted version of it before I could tell you the real one, and I would not have that." Silence. The winter garden outside the window was very still, the way gardens are in February, not dead, not sleeping, but patient, the kind of still that holds something. "Your cousin," she said. "Yes." "He knows." Enough to make it ugly. That is his particular gift. There was a flatness in his voice when he spoke of Peveril, not anger exactly, but the particular cool regard of a man who has catalogued another man's failings over many years and arrived at a verdict he finds uninteresting. He will try to make it sound as though you have been kept, managed, as though the payments were a kind of control, and your presence in this house a kind of arrangement you did not agree to. Were they? She said. He met this directly, with the steadiness that was his most consistent quality. No, you came here of your own choosing. I hired you, Mrs. Aldgate hired you, because you asked for work and deserved it. I have employed you as I employ everyone in this house, with respect for your competence and your dignity. What I did for your father I would have done whether you were in this county or across the sea, because it was the right thing to do and I was in a position to do it. Your being here has been a pause. A privilege, he said, not a design. She was quiet for a long moment. I was in the library as I had promised, and I could not hear any of this. I am reconstructing it from what she told me later, in the strange, suspended evening after it was over, when she came and found me there and sat across from me by the fire with her hands in her lap, and told me all of it in the careful, precise way of a person who has been through something and is trying to understand its shape. But even in the library, even without hearing, I was aware of something. The particular quality of quiet that a house has when something important is happening inside it. A held breath kind of quiet. She said to him, I am still in the parlor now, still in her account of it, the parts that matter most, she said. I do not know what to do with this. You do not have to do anything with it, he said. I am not asking you to. You are telling me that you have. She stopped, began again. You are telling me that you have been watching over my father's life for 7 years, in secret, at your own expense, and asking nothing in return, and I am meant to what? Thank you and go back to the linens. I would not blame you if you did. Would you prefer it? He was very still. No, he said. Another silence, a different kind. Why did you stay in this house? She said, why did you not simply make the payments through Reeves and let me go somewhere else? Why ask Mrs. Aldgate to hire me? I did not ask Mrs. Aldgate to hire you, he said. She hired you on your own merits, which are considerable. I was not party to that decision. But you could have prevented it. Yes. But you did not. No. She held this. He held the silence across from her. The fire was lower now, the winter light fading at the windows, the garden going to gray. I have been in this house for 7 years, she said slowly, as though working through something. I have served at your table. I have carried your linens and your silver and your guests' coats. I have seen you pass in the corridor every morning and every evening. She paused. You have never once looked at me. That is not true, he said. She looked up. I have looked at you, he said, every day. I have been very careful about how I do it and when, and I had hoped, I believed, that I had managed it sufficiently that you would not notice. It appears I was either wrong about that or you are simply putting the pieces together now. The briefest pause. For what it is worth, I notice a great deal. I notice that you read when you have a spare quarter hour, and that you choose the history books rather than the novels, and that you correct Mrs. Aldgate's French occasionally with such tact that she never realizes she has been corrected. I notice that you are kinder to the younger maids than you are required to be, and that you are harder on yourself than you deserve. I notice, he stopped. I notice, Miss Voss, I have always noticed. The not looking was not seeing. She sat very still. Then she said, I thought I was invisible in this house. To everyone else, he said, you perhaps are. To me, you have never been invisible for a single day. I think from what she told me, from the quality of the pause that followed, that this was the moment. Not a dramatic moment, not the kind with tears and declarations and a sweeping gesture. Just a long, quiet, still moment, like the winter garden outside the window, like the held breath quiet of the house. The kind of moment that does not announce itself as a turning point, but simply is one. She said, "What do you want then?" Said, "I want to tell you the truth, which I have done. And I want to tell you that you are under no obligation to me in any way. The payments stand regardless. They are your father's, and he has earned the peace they've given him, and nothing that passes between us changes that. And I want to tell you, because I think you deserve to hear it plainly, that I have admired you very much for a very long time, and that I am not certain, I have not been certain for some years, that admiration is the whole of it." She was quiet. "And I want to know," he said, "what you think of me, not as the Duke of Thornville, not as your employer. As the man who stood in the rain outside the solicitor's office in March of 1818 and saw you hold the papers over your father's head and thought, 'There is a person of real quality.' What do you think of that man?" The silence that followed was, she told me, not empty. It was full of things being considered, weighed, set down, and picked up again. She told me she had felt in that silence the shape of the last 7 years rearranging themselves. The same events, the same corridor, the same passing mornings, but seen now from a different angle, with a different light falling on them. She said, "I think that man should perhaps have trusted me sooner." He was very still. "I think," she said, "that whatever he feared I would do with the truth, I would not have done it. I have more experience than most with situations that are not what they appear to be, and I do not leap to the worst reading of things. I might have been able to." She stopped. Something moved in her face. A kind of old, quiet grief, not for what had happened, but for what the 7 years might have been differently for both of them if he had found the courage earlier. "7 years is a long time," she said. "Yes," he said, "I know. Did you think I would refuse you? I thought you might. I thought more likely that you would feel managed, that you would not be able to separate the gratitude from anything else, that you would not know if what you felt was real or simply relief that someone had been kind." She was quiet. "Then that is a reasonable fear." "Yes, but it underestimates me." "A beat, yes," he said again. "I believe it did." She stood. He stood. They were facing each other across the distance of the small parlor, the fire lower still, the garden gray and patient outside. She said, "I need to think." "Of course. I am going to go back to the corridor and pick up the linens I set down when Mrs. Aldgate called me in, and I am going to do the rest of the afternoon's work, and this evening I am going to think." "Yes," he said. "And tomorrow morning I will come and tell you what I think. I will be in the study. Then I will come to the study." She moved toward the door. She stopped with her hand on the door frame, and she looked back at him. And this is the image I have carried from that day, the one she gave me when she told me, the image I think I will carry until I am too old to carry anything. She looked back at him and she said, "You should not have been afraid of me." He said nothing, but she told me his face changed when she said it, in a way she had never seen it change, as though some long-held tension went out of it, as though something that had been braced for 7 years simply, quietly, let go. She left, and he stood in the small parlor with the winter garden behind him and the lowered fire and the fading light, and did whatever a man does, alone in a room, when something very important has just happened to him. I was in the library when she came to find me. She knocked, which struck me, because she was technically still employed in this house and I was technically a guest, and maids do not generally knock on library doors. They simply enter with whatever they have come to attend to. But she knocked, and I said, "Come in," and she came in and sat in the chair across from the fire and told me all of it. I listened. I am a better listener than people give me credit for when the situation calls for it. My wife would perhaps be surprised to know this. When she had finished, I said, "He is a good man." "I believe he is," she said. "That is not the same as knowing what to do about it." "No," I agreed, "it is not." "You knew," she said. "It was not an accusation. It was simply an observation." "I knew." "How long?" since 1818. She took this in with the same careful steadiness with which she had, apparently, taken in everything else. Then she said, "Did you think he was wrong to do it, to not tell me?" I considered the question honestly. "I thought he was afraid," I said. "I thought it was the fear that was wrong, not the act. The act itself, the payments, the care for your father, that was simply who he is. He does not half commit to things." "No," she said, "I suppose he doesn't." We sat for a moment in the comfortable silence of two people who have both just been through something and are finding their feet. "What will you do?" I asked. "I told him I would think," she said. "I will think." And that was all she would say. She went back to the corridor and she picked up the linens and she did the rest of the afternoon's work, as she had said she would, with the same quiet efficiency that had earned her place in this house. Except that now, according to the younger maid who worked alongside her and told Mrs. Aldgate later and who was not, I regret to say, entirely discreet, except that she was very quiet that afternoon, even by her standards, and once, just once, in the upstairs corridor that runs past the study door. She stopped for a long moment and simply stood. That evening, I told Thornville she had come to find me. He was sitting in the library by then, in the chair I had been in all afternoon, with a book he was not reading open on the arm of it. And he said, "She is going to think," I said. "She will come to you in the morning." He looked at the fire. "She said you should not have been afraid of her," I said. Something crossed his face that I did not name aloud. I simply let it be there. "No," he said very quietly, "I should not have been." The morning came with a thin, bright winter light, the kind that falls on snow and makes everything look very clean and very exact. I came down to breakfast somewhat later than usual, having slept better than I had expected, and found the house with its usual morning quiet, the small sounds of a large household making itself ready for the day. Peveril arrived at 10:30. He arrived by carriage, unannounced, with the air of a man who considers himself the kind of person who does not need to announce himself, which is always a dangerous kind of air. I saw him from the library window, and I went immediately to find Reeves. Reeves, who had seen the carriage from the East Passage, was already moving. "His Grace," I said. "In the study," Reeves said. "With Miss Voss." Reeves permitted himself the smallest pause. "Since 9:30, he said. I felt something in my chest that was approximately relief. If she had come to him at 9:30, and if that conversation was still ongoing at 10:30, then whatever was happening in the study was not quick or transactional. It was not the brief return of a woman who had thought overnight and arrived with a politely worded thanks and a request to be released from her position. Peveril was shown to the drawing-room, by whom I shall not specify, because I do not wish to tax the reader's patience with the logistics of a household's morning circulation, and because the important thing is not who showed him to the drawing-room but what happened when Thornville came to it, 45 minutes later, with Marin beside him. Not behind him, beside him. I was in the hallway, I will be honest. I was in the hallway because I had positioned myself there, because I am the sort of man who, having kept a secret for 7 years, would like very much to see how it ends. And I saw them come down the corridor together, and I cannot tell you exactly what it was about the way they moved or the way they were placed in relation to each other, but I knew. The way you know certain things, without evidence, when you have loved someone for 40 years and learned to read the frequency of them. He was still himself, still the Duke of Thornville, still precise and formidable and contained, but there was something in him that was very slightly different, a quality of the air around him, something released, something settled. She was herself, entirely herself, with the quiet dignity that had always been hers, but now not invisible, not performing the practiced invisibility of a servant in her employer's house, simply present, in the way a person is present when they no longer need to hold themselves apart from a room. Peveril rose when they entered. He looked at Thornville, and then he looked at Marin, and then he looked back at Thornville, and something passed very quickly across his face. The rapid, recalculating expression of a man who had arrived with one story and was finding the ground already changed. "Cousin," Thornville said, not warmly, with the particular courtesy of a man who has drawn a clear line and intends to stand on his side of it, "I did not expect you." "No," Peveril said. His eyes moved to Marin again, assessing. "I had some business to attend to, a matter I thought you should be aware of." He was still using the tone, the carefully concerned, reluctantly sharing tone that was his preferred instrument, but there was less confidence in it than there might have been an hour ago. "A matter concerning some payments that have been made through rather complicated channels to the family of one of your household." "I am aware of the payments," Thornville said. "A beat." "Are you?" Peveril said. "I made them." He said it in the same tone he used for all factual statements, flat, clear, without apology or performance. Over 7 years, through Reeves and a London solicitor, to address a debt situation that affected the Voss family of Crestwick. "I have discussed this openly with Miss Voss this morning. There is no concealment here of which she is not already fully informed." Peveril's jaw moved very slightly. His eyes went to Marin. He was looking for something in her face, confusion, distress, the useful disarray of a woman who has just been unsettled. He did not find it. She met his gaze with precisely the quality of stillness she had always had, the dignity that is not given but grown. "I see," Peveril said. "I thought you would," Thornville said. "I also thought, while you are here, that I should tell you something that you can take back to whatever company you were proposing to share this information with." He paused. "Miss Voss has done me the great honor of agreeing to be my wife. I will not pretend that I was entirely prepared for this. I had known since that morning, since the image of them in the corridor, since the quality of the air around him. But hearing it said aloud, in that room, in that precise and unapologetic voice, was still a thing that required a moment to settle." Peveril stood very still. "Any version of the payment history," Thornville continued, "that you were considering sharing with interested parties will now be received in a rather different light than you may have intended. A man who, for 7 years, quietly and anonymously supported the family of a woman he intended to marry, that is perhaps a story, yes, but it is not the story you were planning to tell." Peveril said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, with the tight brightness of a man reassembling his expression, "Congratulations, cousin." "Thank you," Thornville said. "Reeves will see you out." Reeves, who had been standing in the doorway with the perfect stillness of a man who has managed this house for 30 years, and finds nothing in the world particularly surprising anymore, inclined his head and waited. Peveril left. The room was very quiet. I was still in the hallway when they came out of the drawing room. I made no pretense of not having been there. They both knew I had been there, and I made no apology for it, because I had kept this man's secret for 7 years, and I thought I had earned the ending. Thornville looked at me, and he said, with the dry precision that was his most characteristic mode of warmth, "You may stop lurking now." "I am not lurking," I said. "I am witnessing. There is a distinction." Something moved in his face, something that was unmistakably, for the first time in 7 years of watching, happiness. The quiet, settled kind, not triumphant, not relieved in the exhausted sense, but simply right. The expression of a man who has arrived somewhere he had almost stopped believing he would reach. Marin looked at me too, and she said, and this is the thing I have thought about the most in the years since, because it told me more about her than anything else she said that day, she said, "He told me you kept it for him, all 7 years." "I did," I said. "That was loyal of you," she said, and then, "and somewhat maddening, I expect." "Somewhat," I agreed. "On balance, I found it worth it." She considered me for a moment with the bright, discerning attention of a woman who sees things clearly. Then she said, "I think we shall get on very well." "I believe we shall," I said. The wedding was in April. Not a grand affair. Thornville had no interest in grand affairs, and Marin even less, but a real one, a warm one, in the small church at the edge of the estate that had served the Thornville family for 3 generations, with the moors in the early spring green behind it, and the sky doing something very fine with the morning light. Aldous Voss was there, in a coat that had clearly been purchased new for the occasion, with the slightly bewildered happiness of a man who had watched his daughter's life improve over 7 years in ways he did not entirely understand, and who was now being asked to understand one more improvement, this one considerably more dramatic, and who was managing it with the same gentle dignity his daughter had apparently inherited from him. He shook my hand before the service, and said he had been told I was an old friend of the Duke's. "Since boyhood," I said. "Then you know him well," he said. "As well as anyone," I said. He nodded. He looked at the church door, and then he looked at the moors, and then he said, quietly, with the simplicity of a man who has been through a great deal and arrived somewhere he had not expected, "He is a good man." "He is," I said. "He has always been." Aldous Voss nodded again. Then he went inside. I stayed a moment longer at the church door in the April light, looking at the moors. 7 years of a secret is a long time. It leaves a shape in you, not a bad shape, not a wound, but a kind of permanent impression, the way a heavy thing leaves a mark on a surface even after it is lifted. I thought about the morning in March of 1818, the morning he told me about her. The fire in the library, the brandy, the careful way he said, "Since March." I thought about every summer since, every Christmas, every passing corridor moment and very deliberate looking elsewhere, every Peveril gathering with its probing little courtesies, every letter from Reeves with the careful accounting of the payments made, and the situation managed, and the fiction of the West Indies cousin holding. I thought about the small parlor and the winter garden and what she had said, "You should not have been afraid of me." She was right. He should not have been. She was precisely the kind of woman who would not have done the worst thing with the truth, who would, in fact, have done the best thing, which is what she did. She thought, and she came to him, and she was honest about what the 7 years had cost them both, and then she agreed to begin. But then, I thought, he had also been precisely himself. He had not managed it perfectly. He had been too cautious, too controlled, too determined to protect her from something she did not need to be protected from. He had let the fear of the wrong reading silence him when courage would have served him better. He was a good man who had made a mistake that cost him 7 years. She was the better person, who gave him the rest of them anyway. That is the thing about real quality, I suppose. Not that it is perfect. Not that it never hesitates or misjudges or holds things too tightly for too long. But that when the moment finally comes, when the truth is on the table and the winter garden is outside the window and the fire is low and the air is full of things that need deciding, real quality knows what to do with it. She knew. He knew she would. That was perhaps the cruelest irony of the 7 years. He had understood her quality from the first moment, in the rain outside the solicitor's office, had understood it so completely that he spent 7 years afraid to test it, when all along, and all that time, it was precisely her quality that would have made testing it safe. But then, I have found that fear is rarely logical. It is especially not logical in the men who are least afraid of everything else. I went inside the church. He was waiting at the altar with the stillness of a man who has been waiting, in one sense or another, for 7 years, and who is now very nearly at the end of it. I took my place beside him, as I had taken my place beside him for 40 years, at every occasion that mattered. She came up the aisle on her father's arm, in a gown of pale ivory that was not ostentatious but was exactly right, and she walked the way she had always walked, with the quiet, unperformative steadiness that I had come to understand over the course of one extraordinary February week was not merely a manner but a principle, a way of moving through the world that could not be put on or taken off, but simply was. He watched her come. I watched him watch her. He had spent 7 years not looking at her, in all the rooms of his own house, with a discipline that had cost him something real and had not, in the end, served anyone particularly well. He had looked at landscape paintings and at brandy glasses and at the middle distance of corridors, and had looked in that way at everything except the thing he most wanted to see. He looked at her now. He did not look away. She reached the altar and she stood beside him and she turned, and their eyes met, and whatever passed between them in that moment was not mine to know. It was theirs, entirely theirs, the private currency of two people who had found each other through 7 years of silence and one very long winter morning of truth. But I saw his face, and I know what I saw. I saw the most feared duke in the northern counties look at the woman beside him, the debtor's daughter, the parlor maid, the woman he had watched from the corner of his eye in every room of his own house for 7 years, and I saw him look utterly, quietly, entirely at peace. That is the true end of the secret. That is the thing I have been carrying all these years, waiting for the right moment to put down. I put it down now, with something very close to joy. He chose her. He had always chosen her, from the first morning in the rain. He simply needed long enough to trust that the choosing was something she could hold. She could hold it. She had always been able to hold it. He knew that too by the end.